introduction now. Anyone who comes in a little late will catch the whole webinar. They'll just miss the prologue here. I'm David Tobie. I'm Global Product Technology Manager at Datacolor, and I manage this webinar series, or at least the content of it, with my good friend David Saffir, who's online with us from California, and who's going to be doing the content portion of this webinar today. So I'm going to do the housekeeping stuff up front and tell you a little bit about the products, and then I'm going to hand you over to David for the webinar. So the first thing to consider is that I will be answering questions throughout this webinar just as fast as my little fingers can type. And in order to do that, I need you to only put in questions which are really questions, and that means not support ticket items or not comments on whether you're hearing the audio or not. And I will try to answer all the ones that I see that are what I'll call answerable questions within the hour or so that we have available. Next issue is that we will be doing a giveaway at the end of the show. I believe it will be a Spider 4 Pro. And we will be offering discounts to everyone who attends the webinar after the webinar. So you'll get the information on that, discounts on any Datacolor Spider product. So that's well worth hanging around for. Now, the content that David's going to be covering today is a presentation that he built and that I've worked on with him here for the last few days that's covering what we call the capture tools, which are really a series of tools Datacolor has developed in the last 2 and 3 years mostly. The question I most often got about capture was, I need an ICC profile for my camera, and the answer was no, that's not really what you need. Show me what your problem is. And most people, the problem they showed me was actually nothing to do with any kind of profile for the camera. It had to do with white balance and exposure issues. So the first tool that I developed for this was the SpiderCube to control the color balance of your images and the exposure, and that answered about 90% of those issues. And then there really were some legitimate issues left that the cube didn't take care of. So the next tool that was developed in that series was the SpyderChecker, which truly does calibrate your camera, and that takes care of some subtler issues with color that can occur in capture. And then our third product in capture is not a color tool at all, but it's definitely a calibration tool. It's for calibrating the autofocus of your lenses, or at least checking the autofocus of your lenses depending on the type of lens and camera you have. So those are the tools that David will be going over today, and I believe that there's something here for everybody that shoots serious photography. The question is, which of these things would be of most concern to you, most interest to you? So I'm going to introduce David and hand you over. David is a well-known professional photographer, writer, and speaker who is with us today from his own studio out in the LA area, where it's probably a lot sunnier than it is in my studio here in Maine. And I will get my keyboard heated up for answering your Q&A questions. It'd be great if you'd put the little Q&A section somewhere where you can see it while you're watching the webinar, because there's a fair amount of information that will flow through that little window and not actually be part of the screens that David is going to be showing. So thank you for working with us again today, David, and I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you, David. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, I'm going to proceed. Hi, I'm David Saffir. I'm a photographer. I live near Los Angeles, Southern California, of course. I'm also a digital printmaker and a consultant in color management. And today we're going to talk about calibration for capture in digital workflow. Of course, if I can get the screen to advance, that'd be even better. Okay. So one of the things that's true, I think, is that most photographers have only limited control over their capture technology. There's a lot of things that are maybe not quite above the surface, not quite in view, that we can take advantage of. We can greatly improve accuracy and consistency, even across multiple camera bodies. For example, if you've got a primary camera and a secondary camera, backup camera that you're using, you can actually get them all on the same page as far as the types of calibration and adjustments that we're going to talk about today, and have a seamless integration of images regardless of the device that you're using. Now, the tools for capture management that we're going to talk about by their, I guess you'd call them their real names, are going to be the SpiderCube, the SpiderChecker, and the SpiderLens Cal. And we'll get into each one of those individually and in detail. But examples of some of the things that one can get a better grip on include exposure, control of white and black point, which are absolutely critical, of course, to the overall appearance of the image and also to the detail and highlights and shadows. Color profiling, color balance, much greater efficiency in post-production. I think you're going to be very pleased with some of the things that you see. Focus control, which is a real issue for a lot of us. We're always seeing issues and articles in the media about cameras that are back focusing. You know, they've just been released and the thing is back or front focusing and has to go back in, that sort of thing. I also want to remind you that we are having a drawing for a Spider 4, and we'll be providing a discount code at the conclusion of the webinar. So here's the three devices left to right. We've got the SpiderCube, the SpiderChecker, and the SpiderLens Cal. And we're going to start with the SpiderCube. But first, I want to ask a quick question, sort of a poll, if you will. Do you currently use a gray balance tool, either a card or a lens overlay or a target or a cube or none of the above? Just go ahead and take a moment to answer the poll, and then we'll move right along. Okay, apparently I'm told the polls aren't working, so if you could just, at this point, put your answers in as an answered question and for now, and we will come back to it once the technical people get it fixed. Okay, so moving right along. SpiderCube's a multi-purpose device, and you know, to talk a little bit about the reasons for using it, and then we'll get into what it can do for you to solve some of those problems, the reasons I'm going to give you. I think many of us will agree that the camera meter is frequently inaccurate, which is an unfortunate thing. It does happen, and you know, we need all the help we can get. Digital is not exactly easy to get exposure absolutely correct, and so another tool that's simple and straightforward really makes sense. A lot of the camera color presets, I think we'll all agree, are okay but not the greatest. They get you in the ballpark, but there's still work to do when you get into post-production. And auto white balance, I don't recommend auto white balance to anybody except in extreme circumstances. So what I would recommend is include the SpiderCube in your workflow. It's a known object. It has preset values that you can photograph and use to take your measurements in post-production. You can even use it to adjust your camera, which I'll show you in a moment. And it's useful while you're shooting tethered and in post, in studio and location work. Now, you can use the SpiderCube to set in-camera custom white balance. Now, setting custom white balance is a little bit different from camera to camera, so what I would suggest is you see your camera's instruction manual for details. But the first thing to do is to set the SpiderCube in the shot with your lighting. Use the camera's custom white balance sequence. It's on the LCD menus. And fill the frame with the cube and take your shot using the white balance tools that are available. And setting the white balance in this way maximizes the usefulness of your camera's LCD display. Why am I saying that? The LCD shows you a sort of semi-processed JPEG, and that's the polite way of saying that the preview of your image on your LCD is a lie. That screen has a really limited capability for showing color, contrast, detail, you name it, and of course it's based on a processed JPEG, not your raw file. And so if you can do a custom white balance, you're going to see color and density improve. In other words, your preview is going to be better. It's not going to be as good as if you were shooting tethered and you had the image on a nice display, but it's going to improve. And the white clipping, the blinkies that you can turn on and off on most cameras, which will be more accurate, which helps exposure. So a proper exposure will show blinkies on the chrome ball. If you look right at the top, this little chrome ball here is the only place you should actually see them. It's nice and shiny, gives you a great specular highlight, and it should blink. And if you see the white areas, you can see the one on the right here is more brightly lit than the one on the left. The light's coming from our right, camera right. If you see blinkies on the white panels, then you've got an issue with overexposure. So you've got a really nice tool there. You can compare one to the other very quickly, and if you have blinkies on the white panel, then you're in danger of having an overexposed image. Also, if you look down below, a proper exposure will show this black panel, and it has what's called a black trap, which is always going to be darker than the black panel. As long as you can see the difference between them, then the exposure is not in danger of being underexposed. So it gets you, it's more than being in the ballpark. If you can balance those two things in your exposure in the scene that you're shooting, you're really quite close. You can switch from, say, you started with aperture priority. You can switch the manual exposure and fine-tune. Now, I'm told via a note here that we're ready to post the first poll when I'm ready, so this is probably a good time to do it. So, Kimberly, what do we do next? Just send me a little note, please. Okay, here it comes. It's coming up now. Okay, everybody, so not quite done, not quite done. All right, 46% use a card, 10 use a lens overlay, 18% a target, and 9% use the cube, but 30% use none of the above. So that's something for you folks to think about, something for you to think about, and we're going to show you why in just a second here. Let's go back to our presentation. Now, one of the things that you can do if you're going to use the SpiderCube for your post-production adjustments is take a photograph that includes the cube, and it'll capture important information about your shooting conditions. Now, this little picture here is kind of an eye test, and I apologize for that, but it does give you a reference in terms of what the different surfaces of the cube are doing for you. I already explained part of it, but there's an important thing to take note of is that one side is brighter than the other. Typically, in a lighting setup, you're going to have a key light and a secondary light, just as an example. And so you have a side that's going to face your primary light source and a side that's going to face away from it. So first things first, you can make a choice about whether you want to, which side you want to use. The other thing, of course, is that if you have mixed lighting, you may see different color temperatures on one side of this than the other. And just as a note, the photograph down below, which shows a setup for a piece of artwork, there are actually 3 or 4 lights in this setup. The picture's been cropped for the sake of size, and there are numerous lights bathing this scene. And that's that. So if we go to Lightroom, and here's an example of a photograph taken in really trashy hotel lighting. It's perfect for the purposes of this presentation. It's really messed up, so I presume that the person who took this set the camera to the daylight preset. And so it looks very yellow and very orange and just as distorted as could be. And if you follow my cursor right here, you can see that there is a, underneath the, what do they call this, the treatment panel. They keep changing names and moving things around. Lightroom 4 is really great, by the way. There is a white or gray balance tool here. And if you left click on that, your cursor will turn into it, and you can go over to the SpiderCube, which we conveniently threw on the bed, and you can click on that, and it will automatically balance the color in your photograph. Now, that's a pretty quick solution. To me, that's just like magic. And of course, I'm going to go back for a second. You can also use the black and the white and the gray areas as indicators for you for your black and white points, your midpoints, et cetera, et cetera. But it's the most useful application of this, for anybody, carry a true gray source with you. And the SpiderCube, wherever you go, because it's always going to be useful. There are times where I just toss it out in front of me, or I hang it from a tree, or I put it on a light stand or a tripod. It's got a tripod mount underneath it. And it's always better than guessing later in post-production, always. And I have one in every camera bag. They're small, they're inexpensive. It just makes sense. I want to point out something here that in Lightroom and a lot of other processing tools that we have available to us, if you hold down the Option key and then you move the slider left to right, in this case I'm moving the highlights slider, as soon as I start to make an adjustment with that, you're going to see most of the picture either white out or black out. And then these areas here that are showing up as being luminous are clipping. They're blown out. There's no detail. And so if you hold down the Option key and you make this adjustment, this is a great tip. You can actually see areas where you're sacrificing the details, shadow or highlight, all those kinds of things, in order to get the desired effect. And so you can see where to stop or perhaps even not to do it. And it's something to keep in mind. It works in Camera Raw. It works in Lightroom. Give it a try. Now, let's talk a little bit about Camera Raw. Camera Raw really is driven, and Lightroom 4 are driven by the same processing engine, the same color engine, and they do have many of the same tools, although they are quite different. There are some similarities. And I want you to take a look at the upper left-hand corner of this particular diagram. You can see there's two eyedroppers. We're going to come back to eyedropper number 2, but eyedropper number 1 is the white or gray balance tool that's present in Camera Raw. And so if you click on that and you come over here and you click on the gray, or even in many cases the white area, you will get a color corrected image. And then of course you can proceed over here to adjust some of the other things that you're interested in, exposure and contrast, highlight detail, etc., etc. Now, just as a note about editing, this photograph was taken with the details of the room in mind. It's pretty obvious to me, and it's very, very difficult to do a shot like this with ambient lights in the photograph, where if it's in one frame that you're going to see any kind of detail in the lampshades. And I did try to, for example, recover some of the highlights in this, and they come back a little bit, but just keep in mind that when you're taking pictures like this, that sometimes you're going to have to make a decision between what you would like to show in the photograph and what's possible to show in the photograph. Okay, so now we have another poll. Do you use any form of camera profiling or calibration? We have canned presets, a target-based DNG file, target-based HSL preset, or none. Now, you see, I'm not too surprised by the results of this. 2/3 of the people in our audience indicate that they don't use any of these things. And, you know, they have a reputation, in my opinion, for being hard to use, and that's really wrong. The technology we're going to talk about today is not that difficult to use at all. It's kind of a misconception that seems to be widely accepted, and it's not that much trouble or work, and it doesn't require that much technical expertise. It's been made to be really quite straightforward to use, and it's really quite effective. You'd be surprised at how good the results can be. So we're going to talk about a product from Datacolor called the SpiderChecker. It's a really useful color management tool. You can use it in the field or the studio. Excuse me 1 second, please. I'm going to just take a sip of water. Thank you for waiting. It has a rigid body. The sheets are pigment-based. They have large color patches, and I think it's very important they're replaceable. They do wear. In fact, there is on the very, very lower left, which is hard to see in this photograph, there is what's called a fade checker patch. When that starts to go, that means that it's time to replace the sheets that go in the holder. Also, a couple of other tips. It's a good idea to keep the case closed, and it's a good idea not to scratch any of the patches and keep your cotton picking fingers off, because the oils from your skin may affect them. But having said that, it's really quite durable. It can go anywhere. It's tripod mountable. It has a tripod mount at the bottom, and it will also mount the SpiderCube at the top. Now, there's some software provided with it that can calculate the camera calibration as a standalone, or you can import the picture that you're going to take of the chart, the SpiderChecker, into Lightroom, Photoshop, and now the Hasselblad Focus application. Talking a little bit about the SpiderChecker, the right side contains what's called by some 24 standard patches, and they're near or they're within the sRGB color space, which is a very commonly used color space. And let's see, yeah. And the left side, there's 6 additional skin tones, so there's a total of 8 skin tone patches in the entire chart. The left side also has 6 medium saturation colors and 3 white tints and 3 near black tones. We have gray ramps increasing in 10% steps and extra 5 and 95% samples. Now, the important part is that the software simply and easily generates robust, tunable, custom camera calibrations for you. And you use those in applications like Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw to dial in the color in the photograph that you've created. Now, in terms of using the SpiderChecker, there's 5 steps. First of all, of course, you install the software from the disk, and then you capture an image of the SpiderChecker, and proper lighting is important. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. It's quite simple, but it is important to success. You're going to normalize that image in your application, Lightroom, Adobe Camera Raw, or Focus. You open the image in SpiderChecker app, and that's really quite straightforward also. You fine-tune it. In other words, you crop and choose a rendering intent, and you export this preset to Lightroom or ACR or Focus so you can apply it to your images. Now, we've taken a picture of the SpiderChecker and we've imported it into Adobe Camera Raw. And I've already cropped it to the margins of the chart. So we've excluded the background and a little bit of the frame and that sort of thing. And so there are, on the corners, there are little markers. Where did my cursor go? There are little markers on the corners that you can use as signposts to set the boundaries for your crop. Now, one of the things that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to color balance the chart. And you're going to make some adjustments to get the values in some of these patches to be as good as possible. Now, remember before we talked about eyedroppers, and there's two of them here on the upper left. One is the white or gray balance dropper, and the other one puts a marker for you to use. So what I normally do is I grab that marker right there, and I go over to the panel, and I left-click once, and it drops a little circle with a number next to it, and that number corresponds to this set of RGB values that you see on the upper left. Very, very useful tool. I drop another marker in the gray panel, and I drop another marker in the white panel. Then I go back and I grab the measurement dropper or the balance dropper, and typically click on the gray and balance the photograph. Now, what should happen is that this number 2 is going to show you gray values, RGB, that are more or less in the ballpark of one another. They're certainly idealized here, 120, 120, 120. I don't get too excited if it's one of them is 122 or they're all 122, that sort of thing. But you want it to be in that range. And then the other two are really pretty simple. You want to use the exposure and the shadow sliders to achieve values of roughly 10. The number 1 is in the black patch, 10 across the board, and in the white patch around 230, maybe a little bit higher than that. And so once you get all of those balanced, what you're going to do, and I've cropped it out of here, but of course all of us that have used Camera Raw know that there's a save button on the lower left. You're going to save this as well, I would use a TIFF file, and save that to your desktop because you're going to import that into the SpiderChecker software. We'll get to that in a minute. So if you open the SpiderChecker software, you can use in Lightroom, you can edit in SpiderChecker. We're going to get to that in a minute. You can use a file open command, or you can simply drag and drop that icon into this preview area, and you can get to work. Now in Lightroom, you're going to use the white balance selector, and you're going to click on the 20% gray patch, which we talked about before. And you're going to use the black shadow slider to set black patch to, it's a different value here. It's not RGB values, it's percentage values. And so they're showing percentage, I guess you would call it brightness or intensity in each of the 3 channels. And what you're looking for with the blacks or shadow slider is set the black patch to about 4%, and the exposure set white to about 90%. So here's where your white balance selector lives. Okay, it's under the basic panel. And then right below your histogram, you will see, once you select that, you will see these values pop up. And when you go ahead and either hover over an area or make an adjustment, you're going to see them change. Give me 1 second, please. Okay, now in Lightroom, there's a very interesting, I believe this is also present in Lightroom 3, is that once you've made your adjustments to the photograph of the chart, if you go to Photo and Edit in and Edit in SpiderChecker app, it will open this image in the SpiderChecker application. And once you're in the SpiderChecker application, there's really only a few things that you need to do to complete this task. The first thing you want to do is take note that there are little mini targets, little squares inside each one of the color patches on the chart. and you want them to be more or less centered in each one of those patches. And you can grab these handles here with your cursor and move this up and down and back and forth until they are positioned properly. Okay. The second thing you would do would be to choose your rendering intent. Now, there's some discussion that goes on about rendering intents, but this is a pretty decent guideline. If you're working on artwork or commercial products, that sort of thing, colorimetric is the rendering intent that you should start with to get the kind of results that you want. If you're shooting portraits, there's a portrait rendering intent which reduces skin tone saturation a little bit. And anytime you want a color boost, say a landscape or a street scene, or anytime you want a color boost, use the saturation rendering intent. Now, you're going to be able to save your calibration. You simply indicate whether you're going to save it to Lightroom or save it to Adobe Camera Raw. And when you click on Save Calibration, you can give it a name. I suggest you put the camera name in. And I typically put the date in because I want to know when I made it. And you can put whatever other identifying information that you want in there as well. Now, one common thing that happens is that it's quite easy to put that chart on the stand upside down or on the table upside down. And this is what it looks like. It's not what you want to do. That's why it has this little slash through it. But you can see it looks like it has a case of the measles. And if you see the measles, you're upside down. And it's easy enough in your image editor, your raw processor, to flip it 180 and get back to work. So there you have it. The presets will show up in Lightroom under presets, user presets, and you can see here there's some for the 5D Mark II. Okay, and it's a little tricky in Adobe Camera Raw, but not too bad. It's mostly the fault of Adobe that it's tricky. This tiny icon that shows up in the basic area, this is on the upper right in the Camera Raw panel. If you left click on this, you will see this menu pop up. And if you go down to load settings and you click on that, you're going to see a list of all the presets and adjustments that you've saved in the past, and it will include a list of whatever camera calibrations that you've done, and you simply click on that to apply it to the current image. I'm not going to get into the details of this, but if you want to apply that to multiple images, you have to do that from Bridge, but it's not complicated. Okay, just let me page forward for a second. The last part of the SpiderChecker that I want to talk about is also very interesting. The back side of each of these panels is gray. It's grayscale, and they're called neutral target patches. And they have the same gray ramp as the color face and 10% steps. The large gray patches are set to the 50% level. They can be used for validating display neutrality or setting in-camera balance and things like that. And a quick in-camera balance can be used to ensure that your initial view of images is optimized. For example, if you're shooting just to generate JPEGs. But let's go back to validating display neutrality. It's an interesting thing. You know, the background for Photoshop and Lightroom is gray, and our eyes automatically adjust to the color balance of anything we're looking at. So we can even walk into that funky hotel room, and in 10 minutes that light looks pretty white to us. Maybe not completely, but pretty white. And it's amazing what the eye and brain do together to balance lighting in humans. And so when you're looking at your screen, you can't necessarily tell that that screen color has a color cast or it's off a little bit. But if you have a proper lighting source on your desk next to your screen, one that's color balanced with a good CRI, you can hold the chart next to your display underneath that light and compare the gray on the chart page to the gray on your screen, and you'll immediately see if that screen gray is off. The eye is amazingly good at discerning those differences. And so I would suggest that you do that. It's an immediate indication that you need to recalibrate your display. And you'd be shocked many times at how big a difference that there is if you haven't calibrated in a while. Now, I have another tip for you too, is that if you take a photograph of this, let's say you've got a studio lighting setup, and you want to see if your lighting is even, or you want to see if the lighting on the chart is even, you can flip the color patches around to the gray side, take a picture of it, import it into Camera Raw or Lightroom, and then take that eyedropper or your cursor and hover over the corners, sort of like this, and look at those percentages. And if those percentages change dramatically, let's say it's 80% over here, not 80%, 50% over here, and 60% over here, you've definitely got a side-to-side discrepancy in lighting. So just as a way of checking lighting intensity and evenness, it's a very useful tool for that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the Autofocus Micro calibration. I want to do a quick poll on this, and I'd like to know if your camera doesn't do it, or if you do it from a flat surface, or you use a special target. Now, this micro calibration is driven from a menu, set of menus on the back of the camera. Okay, so roughly 50% say the camera doesn't do it. 20% do a micro lens calibration from a flat surface, and 28% use a special target. That's really interesting. We're going to talk about using tools for judging the focusing capability of the camera, and you don't necessarily have to have a camera that provides micro calibration to take advantage of the tool, and we're going to get into that in just a moment. So the SpiderLens Cal, it can check the autofocus accuracy of any lens camera combination. You can precision tune the autofocus of supported cameras. It's portable. You can take it wherever you want. I know several people that take it on adventures like trips to Africa because the camera gear gets banged around. And you know, it's a good idea to know if after the last whack on the side of the head, so to speak, that your camera is still doing what it's supposed to be doing. And it's great for field work. You know, and if the camera doesn't provide the micro adjustment, I don't know if any of you have had this issue, but not so long ago, I had a camera body that was giving me really significant problems with focusing. And the people in the, it wasn't that long ago, but in any event, the people in the repair depot were giving me issues with it. And so, you know, this kind of test, a simple set of photographs of this target and the way it works, along with the camera, would settle any kind of disagreement about whether or not the camera needs to be repaired. So there's a number of uses for this outside the micro adjustment of autofocus on your own. And of course, you're going to be doing this, you know, the correct way to do this is to be doing this for every lens camera combination that you have. And that's a straightforward 5-step process. Basically, you set up the camera and the lens cal, and the setup is probably 80% of success in this, and it's more a matter of just attention to details over 5 minutes to get it right. You autofocus and take a picture, and you review the image and check the focus. If it's available to you, you calibrate with in-camera focusing correction, and you shoot a second picture and evaluate. So that's it in a nutshell, and now we're going to dig down into the details. Now you can put the lens cowl on a tripod or set it up on a level table. The base should be level. There's a built-in bubble level, and the target should be at 90 degrees to the base. And those two, this is all very, very important. Very simple to do. You can see it's mounted on a light tripod or a stand here. And you can see that the base is parallel to the floor and the target is vertical. Okay? It really can't be set up like this. It's not going to work if it's tilted. So if the stand is tilted and you don't level this, it's not going to give you a good result, etc., etc. Now the other thing is that the camera, the plane of the camera, okay, whether it's film or digital, has to be parallel to the target. Okay, and I'm going to back up a second. So here's the target, and actually the part we're going to focus on is right here where my cursor is hovering. You really want that camera plane to be parallel to the target, and that really means that you have to take a moment and step back and take a look at it. You don't want it to be looking up. You don't want it to be looking down. And what you can't see in these diagrams is you don't want it to be turned to the left or turned to the right. It has to be, the center of the lens has to be centered on the target, okay, and it has to be parallel to parallel. One way to take a last look at this once you think you've got everything set up, well, by the way, and put a bubble level on the camera to help you with this. But what I normally do, this is a lot like shooting artwork for reproduction, is once everything is set up and I'm ready to start shooting, I just back up to the right side or the left side, and I look at the back of the camera and the plane of the target or the artwork, and you can see pretty fast if they're not parallel. You can see if the camera's tilted. And it's another view, and most people don't bother to do this. It's another view or a reality check that will serve you well. And by the way, I should mention these bubble levels, they're modestly priced. I wouldn't say they're cheap, but you can get them in any camera store, and you can see this has a flange that goes right in the hot shoe on the camera. Now the camera settings for capture, you want to be in aperture priority or manual mode, and you want to be at the widest f-stop, that lens that you have mounted, the widest stop that will allow. And the reason is simple, is that if you stop it down, you're going to get depth of field, and you're not going to readily see whether there's any issues of front or back focusing. I strongly recommend that you use a tripod. The instructions that come with this say that the tripod is optional, but my feeling is that I've never been able to line things up in parallel without a tripod, so I use one. And you want to set the camera to using not multi-autofocus points, but the center autofocus point, and not in dynamic focus mode, but single shot mode, and focus on the target. So from a slight distance, you might focus in the center of the target, but when you're getting in a little bit tight, you want to focus right here at almost at the junction of these two side bars. Okay, and you're going to shoot at a distance of 5 to 10 times your focal length, and a 35mm lens, that would be 18 to 35 centimeters. And 35 centimeters is roughly 14 inches. So it gives you an idea that you're not really right on top of it, you're not across the room. It's a middle distance. You want a good exposure with even lighting. And take 1 or 2 photos, and one of the things is with this, if you're putting a camera on a tripod and you know, I can't possibly predict where you're going to be shooting. Let's say you're out in the field. You don't want to crank up the ISO for this. You want to keep the ISO down to the native for the camera, which is typically 50 or 100 or 200. And so your shutter speed might be a little bit slow. Use a remote shutter release. My big fat fingers almost always shake the camera. So that remote release, or if you don't have one, put it on self-timer, will serve you well. You get a sharper picture. And review the test image, and if you can, You know, you can shoot tethered, of course. If you can't shoot tethered, then take the time to take the card out of the camera, load the picture onto a laptop or your desktop computer, and look at it on a larger display. You'll get a much better view of what's going on. Now let's talk about the adjustments. Now I apologize in advance for this slide. This is an eye test. I wanted to try and capture everything in one place for convenience sake, and I hope it works for you. You're going to review the test image. If you look at this top image here, you're going to ask yourself, is the 0 in focus or not? Obviously, in both of these images, it's not in focus. If the one, the number that's farther away from you, is in focus, then it's back focusing. And if the one that's closer is in focus, it's front focusing. And on the cameras that are supported, there are you can parse through the menus and you can find the micro adjustment for or autofocus fine-tune depending on which company. I think the one on the left is Canon, the one on the right is Nikon. And this very nice diagram from the Nikon manual, you simply make an adjustment with the joystick and you move it towards or away depending on what the results in this picture are. And the same thing is going on over here with these two screens. You're going to adjust forward or backward. And what I suggest you do is first of all, you always want to make sure that you're adjusting by the lens. Okay, not adjust all by the same amount. That's not going to serve you well. And I should also throw in a thought here before it gets away from me. You can always disable or turn this off or reset it if you don't like the results. Okay. Make small adjustments. Don't grab the thing and crank it all the way over because you're going to wind up coming back. Make a small adjustment and go ahead and reshoot the target and make another adjustment and do it in increments. I think that you'll find that you'll get a better result and you'll be happier. You won't be sort of thrashing back and forth. So it may require a few cycles of shoot, adjust, and shoot, adjust. It's really not that big a deal. It's simply a matter of, you know, being patient. And even if you don't have this capability on your camera, I'm sure that if you discover that your, you know, very expensive 70 to 200 lens, which in some cases are notorious for back focusing, is off, and you send it to the service department, you send in this picture with it, they will fix your camera. Okay, and you know, I have found that on some camera bodies there is one lens that has an issue, and on other camera bodies there's no lenses that have an issue, or several that have an issue. So it's the kind of thing where you might want to just set it up and just do them all at once and get it over with, and then you know what you have. Now, here's an example, and David Tobie gets photo credit for this, and you can see his focal point. He indicated to me his focal point was the center of this mass of butterflies, but you can see that the foreground and the midground are not sharp, and the background is sharp, and so it's definitely back focusing. And you know, it's pretty disappointing to be out all day long and find yourself with a whole card full of images that aren't working for you because you didn't go and do this. Now, I just want to emphasize just a couple of things before I move along. We're slightly ahead of schedule, but I do suggest that you follow this recipe. We're going to post this webinar as a recording, and so you're going to have all these diagrams and things available to you online. I think it takes about a week, but I strongly urge you to pay attention to the details. It probably adds 10 minutes to the process and gives a much better result. And of course, make sure that they're parallel. That's very, very important. And shoot at the correct distance, at the correct aperture, and then make your changes iteratively. I think that's very important. You don't want to be pushing it too hard because you're just going to wind up cycling back, and you won't be a happy camper. Okay. Now the cameras that are supported are on this list. I think this list is probably not complete. In other words, any camera that offers the micro adjustment can take advantage of the lens cal capability. I'm sure there are more cameras out there that are being added every day. We just had the D800 and D800E join the pack, and not that long ago, the 5D Mark III. But this gives you an idea of what's available out there. And of course, you don't have to do it yourself. You can always have it adjusted at a repair shop or at the service depot for a major camera manufacturer. Now, I believe that, well, we're only 5 minutes early. That's not so bad. The winner of the Spider 4 Pro is Robert Kelly. Robert Kelly, congratulations. And I want to announce that there's 20% off Spider products and free standard shipping when you purchase from the Datacolor website. The promo code is CAPTURE20. CAPTURE20. Now it's for a limited time. There's going to be a follow-up email that's going to go out and tell you just how long this promotion is going to last. So watch for that email. The email, I believe, will also include the schedule for upcoming webinars. Previous webinars, if you haven't had a chance to see them, are posted on the Datacolor website as recordings. Now, I'd like to thank Datacolor Corporation for sponsoring this webinar. Their website is www.datacolor.com. I'd like to thank David Tobie for his support and guidance. His website is, his WordPress blog is cdtobie.wordpress.com, and he has a website at cdtobie.com. And then, of course, my information is here. My blog is probably the thing that would be most useful to you. It has quite a bit of content on it, including things about screen-to-print match, landscape photography, portrait photography retouching. There's quite a bit of content on there. There's something like 250 plus articles. Also for my students, I wanted to mention that if you send me an email, I will do my best to answer it. If you have a question, something you want to know about, some problem you're trying to solve, send me an email at dsaffir@mac.com. I get a lot of emails, so if I don't answer you within 24 hours, please do send it again. It just means that I missed it in the avalanche. Particularly after something like this, there's a lot of people that are sending me emails. And so, but I encourage you to, if you have a question that you can't answer through the instruction manual or the Datacolor website, which has got a lot of content on it, then do please send me an email, and I'll do my best to take care of you. Thank you all for attending. I hope that you'll come back for subsequent webinars. And again, my thanks to Datacolor for their support. Have a good day.
Hey, thank you very much, David. Did we cover the idea of a discount for users after this event?
Yes, I did.
Okay, I missed that. I was busy typing away and can't hear everything, so I just wanted to check on that. So thank you everybody for attending. We're going to be running another webinar this same time, the middle Wednesday of next month and most every month. These are our advanced webinars. We may sneak in an introductory webinar. So any of you who felt overwhelmed by this and simply want to know more about the difference between Spider 3 and Spider 4 or Spider 3 Pro and Spider 4 Elite, we kind of cover that stuff separately and would have to do a different webinar on it. So we'll see about putting one of those together. At the moment, the series that we have listed are a series of different events on different types of special uses and advanced stuff. So thanks for attending. A surprising number of people came and a surprising number of people stayed for the whole webinar, so we'll give David Saffir credit for that.
Thank you.
It's now almost 4 o'clock, so I think we can safely close the webinar out and hopefully hear from you later. Take care.